I'm Sue Ellen Case from the Center for Performance Studies, and we are co-sponsoring this with the Arts and Activism. It's not a center, it's a group. And we're both pleased to present Beatriz Da Costa, who is an associate professor in the Department of Studio Art at UC Irvine. And she's also part of the Arts Computation Engineering graduate program, affiliate faculty with the Arts Science Center and Culture and Theory. So she crosses many disciplines among art, technologies, and theories. She is a former collaborator of the Critical Art Ensemble, which is a collective of tactical media practitioners with various specializations from computer graphics and web design, photography, text art, book art, and performance. She's the co-founder of Preemptive Media, an arts activism technology group with projects like Swipe, so you can find out what the data is on those swiped cards, Moport, which is a mobile phone collective reporting matrix, and other projects. She's a practitioner of what has been called rogue data collection, which is collecting data with very little money by individuals and artists rather than, let's say, municipal or state-funded or federal projects. Air still open, where people were invited to use portable air monitoring devices to explore their neighborhoods for air pollution testing, and the Pigeon Blog project, which was done with homing pigeons and miniature GPS units and SIM cards, also to monitor pollution. She has a forthcoming book, or is it out? A forthcoming anthology called Tactical Biopolitics, Art, Activism, and Technoscience. So please welcome Beatriz Da Costa.
Thank you, Sue, for this wonderful introduction, and thanks again, Victoria, for having me out. It's a pleasure to be back at UCLA, and thanks to all of you who could make it. I know it's the end of the quarter, and faculty are not the only people going crazy, so I really appreciate you coming. And I do not like to start lectures with a disclaimer, but the reason I'm sitting here, for the first time in my life, I got motion sick on an airplane, so I kind of feel I'm on a boat right now, and might have to improvise a little bit. But yeah, the project I am planning to start with was Pigeon Blog, what Sue just mentioned. And it was really my most recent completed project. Let me call it like that. I have other things going on right now, but this was the last art project that sort of was premiered 1.5 years ago now. And what I was interested in at the time was find alternative ways on how we could measure air pollution data and do it in such a way that is unusual enough that it maybe might raise attention around a topic that is by no means new or hidden. All of you live in LA, all of you know how visible the pollution is. So how do we address a topic that in a way, everyone knows about it. So it's really not about making the invisible visible in this case. It's more like, how do you address the visible in a way that gets people to think, hopefully, and act in new ways. So what we did with Pigeon Blog, and when I say we, I worked on this with two of my graduate students at the time, Sina Hasek and Kevin Ponte, both with backgrounds in engineering. The homing pigeons, the owner of the homing pigeons in this case, Bob Matsuyama, who's a pigeon fancier living down in Southern California, and myself, as well as Rufus Edwards, who is an air pollution, I'm about to call him air pollution scientist. He's actually in social ecology, and his research has been around air pollution, mostly in developing countries, who worked as a consultant. So what we did is we developed these miniature monitoring devices, which we started calling the backpack here on the back of the bird. What they consist of is the actual air pollution sense in our case was carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides, microcontroller to process the data, a little GPS chip, and a SIM card to essentially block the data, hence the name, while the birds were flying to our server so that we could visualize that information in real time. So it was really taking the metaphor of the blog and of the citizen journalism, of the reporting, just in this case, it was birds or their backpack performing this activity. People always ask, how did you come up with this idea? What was the inspiration? And I do think, quite honestly, we never can really tell. I mean, there's many factors that come into play when you come up with an idea in a project that you suddenly commit yourself to for a year, 1.5, 6 months, depending on where you're at. But I think one of the images, one of the inspirations for this project, in addition to LA's 6-lane highways, were these photographs, which were on the web and show pigeons from the beginning of the 20th century and the technology developed at the time that essentially are what was considered then miniature cameras. So they're mechanical cameras, they're on a mechanical timer, and it was literally a new approach to aerial photography, at least that was the desire. And it was a German engineer, Julius Neubrunner, who designed it, now on display as in taxidermed form in the museum in Munich. So you can still see them, but what fascinated me at the time is, like, you know, we have a surveillance technology here, and we have a very early instance, and that surveillance technology happens to work because the birds come home, and because it's hard to shoot the birds off the sky. It's hard to detect them on the radar, at least. So, you know, it was trying to use this, what we might now think of as a low-tech system. At the time it wasn't, but for military purposes. So for me, I mean, the German War Department became interested, and I couldn't never really find out if they were actually used in World War I or not. Some sources said that, other sources said this. I don't think there were, but homing pigeons' involvement in the military has a long history, especially that really flourished in World War II. But my thinking was, okay, how could we transform this approach to its 21st century version, and in this case not for military purposes, but more for civilian and activist purposes. You know, what type of activity could the birds and the humans perform together that might raise some attention, in this case, about air pollution. So this was our first, I believe it was the first test flight, but that was at UCI. Sina Hasek, one of the collaborators, and the bird taking off. So as you can imagine, birds, they can only carry so much weight, and there's usually a formula between the body weight and what they can actually carry during flight time. So it's between 5 and 8%, depending on which bird you look at. So getting the technology, you know, it's like, okay, some of us like technology development. It's not that we hate it. But to build a cell phone from scratch was kind of a big task. And it was, so it wouldn't be one that I would just choose because I like to work on that kind of thing in my spare time. But it was something we had to do because we had to get it small enough and light enough to make it pigeon friendly. We had to have a pigeon-sized phone. So this miniaturizing of the actual device took months and months and months, and I'm not going to tell you how many headaches and late nights in the studio. So this is a very early prototype. I mentioned earlier we have the pollution sensor, microcontroller, the SIM card. This was the combined GSM, so what will, you know, the protocol that will allow you to talk to the cell phone towers and also the GPS unit. It got smaller after this one. Then we had to learn how to calibrate the sensors, and this was really where Rufus Edwards came in and consulted. So our first crude attempts, we literally stuck you know, a tube in the exhaust of the car, and we're leading it into our little chamber, trying to measure what we were getting. So that was another iterative process. That's the team and 4 birds. So Sina, Kevin, myself, and Bob Matsuyama. And it was interesting to me at the time because, you know, honestly, I didn't know that pigeon racing really existed. I didn't know that there was a sport called pigeon racing, that there are people around all over the country, in Europe and several other places throughout the world, who are fancying pigeons for different reasons. In some cases, for the thumbler, the shows, in some cases for racing, in some cases just for the purpose of breeding beautiful birds. So the pigeon fanciers I worked with were pigeon racers, or flyers, how they like to call themselves. And the story, so I had to find a collaborator, right? I mean, originally I was hoping I would have my own little pigeon loft, and as soon as I started looking into it, I was like, boy, I better start working with people who know what they're doing. So I talked over the phone and met many, many pigeon fanciers in this process in order to see who might be interested in working on this project and would be excited by it. So the story you often hear is like, well, I was 5 years old and a pigeon fell off the roof. And my father's friend, the neighbor, he had a pigeon loft and he showed me how to take care of the bird. And then I did that for 10 years, and then I had to take a job, and 30 years later I started picking it up again. So the population of people doing it, what you mostly find, Bob is actually very young. What you mostly find are male senior people who are invested in the sport. At least my little unofficial demographic study revealed that data. And what you also find, some people are very serious about it. So it's a sport, it's about making money, it's about winning. So you have races from where you enter a couple dollars per bird as an entry fee for the race. You have races where you enter $1,000 per bird. So the prices for the win, you have, like with any sport, it goes from hobby to professional. And you also find a very different approach to the actual breeding. Like with any breeding, there's often a pride. These birds, this line comes originally from Belgium. There's a famous Belgium line, and they create their own lines and their own breeds. And in some cases, let me just put it like this, that mentality didn't always sort of jive with the project. So I was more looking for somebody who might not be too much on the professional end, and it's doing it out of love for the birds and for the fun. And Bob Matsuyama is a middle school teacher, science middle school teacher, and shop teacher in Costa Mesa. So he was kind of my guy. I mean, he was just up for the challenge. The project was released at IZ in 2006. For the first time, it was a public release, and we did it from the clock tower in San Jose. So we were flying, I believe, 4 birds here with the devices on, and another 10 or so to come along. Because often what you have with these birds is like one starts flying, and then the other one, they sort of encourage each other as they fly home. So the way they're trained is essentially you release them anywhere, and they will always fly back home, which in this case means where they were born. It's the loft where they were born. In I believe I don't have... In World War II, I don't have those slides here, but what was really fascinating to me is that there were was something called the Pigeon Corps, and the US had it, the Allies had it, the Germans had it. So each military had this little section of pigeons who were part of it, as well as their caretakers, and they were used for things like a soldier was lost, and they always had a couple of birds and could send a message back home, in this case meaning the loft of the Allies, or the loft of where their partners were, saying, we are here, don't bomb this area, we're here, get us out. It was a messaging system. It was really what we all have seen in the past. But what I found fascinating about that is that there had to be a lot of collaboration between the civilian population and the military population in order to get this whole system going. So there were contacts made with pigeon fanciers in the various countries where the war was happening. So what you see here is, I mentioned we visualized the data, so our version at the time was to use Google Maps and essentially plot a data point each time an SMS message was sent. And you could replay the data, so over time you would plot the actual flight of the bird. You could see the data at each location. So this particular one here said it had low carbon monoxide, high nitrogen oxide. You see the altitude, the distance, and the speed is a little bit, in this case it says 30 miles per hour. In some cases it will tell you 2 miles per hour, and this is because the birds actually stopped in between. So they're flying at an average speed between 30, 40, sometimes on a race 60 miles. With our devices they were a little slower. And they fly up to 800 miles. Again, with our devices, we flew them 20 maximum. But they're really athletes. I mean, they're trained for performance. Yeah, these is a Pretty Rock website. And here I just put those two little photographs that were taken, well, I'm not sure if by this guy, but one of his colleagues 100 years ago. So what you see are the pigeon wings on the side and sort of the distorted angle of those aerial photographs. So Pigeon Blog as a project got many reactions, but let me back up for 1 second. I mean, for me, and you will see it, I will sort of go chronologically a little back in time. It's like, for me, I mean, Pigeon Blog was many things, but it was also one of the tests that when we tried to work in between arts and science, or in my case, being originally trained as an artist with a little foot over in engineering, and we want to engage this, you know, flurry of disciplines that in many ways it's on the other side of campus. It's not where our home was originally. The claims that are often made is like, you know, it's a mutual beneficial relationship, which I believe. But the other one is also, you know, it's the attempt of trying to do both at the same time. And I don't know if that's necessarily a goal one should aspire to, but it was a goal, it was something I wanted to test. I wanted to see, can I come up with a project that can really fulfill an activist in art and have some validity or contribution to the sciences. So in this case, they did mention earlier one of the aspects in air pollution measurements around an urban environment, let's take Los Angeles, is that you have fixed monitoring stations around the city. And each monitoring station, of course, costing tens of thousands of dollars, will take the measurements for that particular location, and then you have one 20 miles further down the road, and you calculate all the data that's in between. So the actual science is actually in that interpolation modeling to get the whole airshed of the city. That's where all the resources and mathematics go in. So what you get are average values, and but what you do not get is necessarily the exposure to an individual human or to an individual living something in that city, because measuring it here and measuring it there might give you an average of what is between here and there, but it doesn't tell you exactly what's there. So if you think about it in terms of human exposure, or if you just think about it in terms of verifying those interpolation models, that's actually where Rufus Edwards got excited about this project, because he said, well, theoretically, if you really get it to work, what you do is you slice little measuring points in those interpolation models. So I didn't know that beforehand, but it was one of the reasons of why he became interested in consulting. So Pigeon Blog got, for better or worse, it got a lot of attention. And the reason I'm mentioning that it got a lot of mass media attention in this case, because not always for the best reasons. In some cases, people were just excited, thought it's cool to put a chip on a bird, which is sort of the type of, first of all, it's not a new thing to do. And second is the type of techno-feed approach I'm actually not that excited about myself. It was not the inspiration of the project yet. I have to admit I like my little gadgets, so I shouldn't be surprised I got that quote-unquote community excited. But as a platform, I think if we try to think about art activist hybrid practices, one of the things that I believe many artists are good at, if they want to go down that route, is to get the attention of the mass media. It's something we can actually do that many other groupings, communities cannot so easily do. So it is a platform that if we want to use it, if the idea is, or the goal in this case is, you know, to talk to as broad enough an audience, even mediated to the mass media, it's a tool that's available to us and that we can think about of using and for our purposes. I personally don't like to have a spotlight on myself to that extent, actually, but it is something I certainly became aware about through the years. Why? I'm missing a slide. Okay, so the other reactions I got from Pigeon Blog were much less friendly. It was from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. So PETA tried to stop. I still think they were not that serious about it because they actually didn't show up, but they did call the chancellor of my university. I mean, they tried to stop me from conducting this project. And what was interesting to me is that the rationale behind it is that I didn't have a sufficient enough scientific justification in order to be working with birds. So performing open surgery and all kinds of things, it's fine if it's conducted in the name of scientific progress. If we're working with pigeons, which were not harmed in this project, in the name of, creative social engagement, that was something that, a banner had to be, it had to be shut down. So it certainly raises the question, and Sue Ellen mentioned earlier that I used to work with Critical Art Ensemble, but the question of what constitutes valid research, what kind of tools and engagements can we have as artists before people really try to get us back into this art bubble, which in my opinion already doesn't exist, but that seems to be wanting to be reproduced by people whose interest that serves was interesting. The other reaction, that was actually one of the nicest one. That was from the American Racing Union, the American Racing Pigeon Union. And can I read it? This certificate is awarded to Professor Beatriz Da Casta in recognition of valuable contribution lending to the positive image of homing pigeons. I really like it. Just came in the mail. It came in a big envelope. Had the little seal on it, and it's hanging on my office door right now. I have until 5. How long do I have? 5, right? Until 5 o'clock in terms of time. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to show you the full pigeon blog video. If you're interested, it's linked from my website, so that will give you more of the story, the actual releases in San Jose, some of the reactions, interviews. But instead, I'm going to show you a 4-minute short one that was one of the first test flights we had, so maybe giving you. Hey, Bob. We're in front of your house. It's going to be fun.
Right.
So a battery, SIM card, antenna. Like I said, we have communication with the cell phone towers. Kind of important. I like that. I think against it.
This has my name and address on, or name and phone number. And this little thing is a computer chip that registers when he comes home. I'm going to go over his head. Okay. And then I told Andy, just set it as loose, maybe go on a...
Yeah, let's make it very loose,
We'll
because it's like
do
it
it.
stretches when you do the other side,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to bother his head too much. So. You think that's okay?
Yep.
Do you carry him in a box like that?
Yep.
Okay.
Maybe I'll see if I can get a volunteer to go with him.
Oh, Pidgey. It's going to be okay.
Do you have, you gonna go through the whole thing right now? Are you gonna set the GPS? And
It's all set.
is it running right now?
Yeah. It's
So
trying to
is-
find a signal now.
Oh, but you don't know if it's...
The next version will actually have LEDs, so we'll know what's going on.
Okay, so you have to go back to the lab and take a look at your computer and
Yeah.
Where's
issues and
Pidgey?
everything else.
Where's the bird?
Should I put him in?
I think he's in the other
no,
truck.
it's there.
We're gonna get there and go, where's the bird?
They also want that you latch on the side.
What's the interval for
Well,
points for plotting? Like,
Right now it's 30 seconds.
so you probably want to go somewhere that's going to take a few
We
minutes.
want
Yeah.
to go so that it would fly a few minutes. That's the goal. Go to the bench there.
well, wherever you pick the, kind of follow you. Come out the door here, they're gonna jump out and take off. Okay. There he goes. Okay, keep flapping. see, the other guy's just, he kind of floats. This guy's flapping about twice as fast.
Yeah.
Stay together today.
There
Yeah,
we go.
looks like they're having fun.
Yeah, it does.
I don't think you have any trouble coming back from UCI.
Wow.
It took them
Now they went
21
down.
minutes today from
Are they
the
home?
They'll beat us home. They'll be home with you back.
But in August and in September, we want your birds. It's like 2 things from UCI.
Oh no.
It's gonna be great.
Try and get 3 of them,
Yeah.
you know, ready. Xander Hyde. Yeah, Jim's the one. You contacted Jim, huh?
Yeah, Jim van der Heide.
How did you get a hold of him?
You know, it's like when I started, it's like one person told me the name of the next person who told me.
Collaboratively.
Yeah. You go in, Nat?
Whoa. You must have been hungry.
Going out?
Yeah.
Anybody fly out? Nope. What a good guy.
Can you tell if he's stressed?
No, he's not stressed. He just wants to come home and eat. Okay.
Still on.
Still on.
Okay, so that was after many fitting sessions in the loft, our first flight. So we trained a few birds specifically because you really had to get them used to have the backpack on for a couple of hours, take it off. I mean, it was a very long iterative process. Okay, the next project is called Area Immediate Reading. I think was the shortcut we used. It's another project addressing air pollution, in this case conducted in collaboration with Brooke Singer and Jamie Schulte, who are the other members of Preemptive Media. And what we were interested in here is essentially, you know, we didn't have birds, we had humans in this case. So humans can carry more, and humans might have a different immediate interest in how they want to explore and discover their own city in terms of air pollution data. So what we designed here are these air monitoring devices. The inside had parts of pigeon dog in it, but the outside looked very different. So when the other one was sort of a do-it-yourself cell phone, this one became a do-it-yourself PDA enhanced with air pollution sensing and GPS. So this device had two different modes. One was just you could look down on it and see what the data was at your current location, or you could tilt it up into the compass mode or binocular mode, and you could see how far you were at your current location from a known, we call it fossil fuel burning hotspots, so industries and refineries around the city, where the data was given by the EPA and was known to be a high pollutant industry, a high pollutant location. So you could tell, okay, I'm about half a mile from industry X, direction southwest. We get a digital compass in there. So it was really a way to read and explore your city. You could also see how far away you were from another carrier, also having one of our current air devices. So the idea was, as Preemptive Media, we have built a lot of low-tech technology. Often little kids, you can take you can take home with you, all usually, you know, designed to raise awareness around a specific social justice topic. But in this case, those devices in the end were $700, so they were way beyond the budget where we could just give them out as presents and say, hey, come to our workshop, it's all free, you get one, take it home with you. So our solution and approach was, okay, if we can only build 7, and you know the normal participant in the workshop will not have the means to go home and rebuild it themselves, it was also electronically rather complicated. We just wanted to give the devices away and never see them again. So we were planning to have a game-like aspect in this particular project. So you were supposed to have it for 24 hours, register it online, you have it for 24 hours, and then you have to pass it on to a friend, colleague, family member, and that person has it for 24 hours. So, and you would always be connected with the other people having a device. So it was an attempt to see if this glitzy gadget would get people interested and involved in this grassroots air pollution data gathering, or not. So it was really seeing this game-like structure. would encourage people to participate who might otherwise not, because you know how it goes for art openings. If there's an art opening and I hear there's a project about environmental issues, the people that will come are the people who are interested in it already, which is not a bad thing, but we're always looking for ways to reach the people who just would not come or might not have been interested. So that was the dream. That dream didn't quite happen because what we realized, the moment you give something away, you can't fix it, which is, once it comes to electronics, it's a little bit dangerous. We're all good now at having our shows running, not break down before the end of the show, but at some point there comes the repair mode. So suddenly if you talk about developing devices that you will never see again, what you're actually saying is building consumer electronics on an artist's budget, which is just, unfortunately, was not possible. So our solution was you could check them out at the gallery space and bring them back. This was the visualization for the first version, so done in collaboration with staff at IBEAM. So this project was sponsored by IBEAM and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. And it was in part in response of what they called at the time the Social Sculpture Commission, and was actually supposed to address issues at ground zero. So the last thing we wanted to do at the time was a memorial or another sort of mourning site, but looking at issues that were still pertinent to the area. And all of you remember the huge toxic clouds, which were not CO and NO2, but it's one of the reasons on why we started addressing air quality in that region. So this was a workshop at Riverside where we temporarily teamed up with the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice in Riverside. They were part of the panel, and they're an organization who really fight. I don't know how many of you know, but Riverside and San Bernardino have the worst particulate matter and ozone problems. So ozone more in San Bernardino and the other one in Riverside. And you have essentially, just the development of the whole area. It used to look like this, and now most of it looks like this, which, I mean, we used to all be like this. Right now, we had one dairy farm right next to all the, what they called mega warehouses. So to me, this doesn't look particularly dirty, but if you have like miles and miles and miles and miles of these warehouses, they're used to store the goods and products from the LA harbor temporarily until they move to other parts of the country. So what you have are diesel trucks and diesel trucks and diesel trucks and diesel trucks, which creates this incredible amount of pollution. I mean, it's the highest in the entire nation in one spot, on comparable with certain cities and so-called developing nations. So it is really bad, and it is really a health hazard in this area. So the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice does not only work on air pollution, but environmental justice in the entire region. So we did a walking tour in this area with our devices. And in this case, we abandoned our beautiful flash visualization, but went to Google Earth temporarily. So we could give more of the actual, these are the pollutants in the area, and I guess, what do we have here? Yeah, we put up UC Riverside because that's where the panel was in this case. So it's, I forgot, it was tons per, particles per ton. That was the data that UC Riverside itself, I think it's tons per year, is creating as pollutants. So you have carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, producing, yeah. So yeah, we don't just have refining, we have all types of industries, and you can get that data directly from the EPA, so we just sort of plugged it into that was a workshop and show in Belo Horizonte in Brazil. Not surprisingly, we got a lot of high values there. This was a workshop series in Australia I did, essentially trying to do the low-tech, do-it-yourself version of our fancy glitzery device, because you have that device, and once a project is over, it's on your shelf, won't get used. So there's always the desire on how to share that knowledge so other people could continue similar things. So it was an electronics workshop for people who were interested in building in a less pretty version the same functionality we had for the device. So people, I gave my little microcontroller lectures, and people could then explore the city with their own devices. We're still in Google Earth, this time a little bit upgraded in terms of visualization, so you would actually see it by spot and color-coded. Yeah, that was in the work. Very briefly, two other projects again. Air pollution, that was an attempt that was also in 2006 with Professor Tamu Yi down at UCI, and we were looking into building a yeast-based air pollution sensor. So as you can tell, I was a little obsessed with air pollution at the time. So it worked in the lab, so essentially the cells did change color in response to high doses of carbon monoxide, and we sort of built aspects. It was kind of like a cooking show, again at IZEA, of those sensors where people could participate, but we had to bring, we couldn't build the entire yeast sensor in like a couple hours, but sort of brought the different ingredients, people were mixing them together. And we're testing a tea, and I think this test actually failed. But it was an biotech, it was actually a biotech workshop series, so it was 4 artists, I think I'm saying that here. Paul Vanaus, Symbiotica, Natalie German-Tinker, and myself. So we were all conducting different workshops. And right now the experiments, and I think this will be the last for air pollution, but I'm working with a plant physiologist who is up at the Kearney Agricultural Center in the Central Valley, and his area of expertise is ozone damage on crop species. So we were looking if, according to his hypothesis, there should be an immediate reaction to a high ozone exposure. So it's literally using the plant, the unmodified plant, it's not a transgenic plant, as an ozone sensor. So my idea is that you kind of have your petunia on your window shelf that can give you the pollution weather forecast. I'm not sure if we can actually get there, but that's the hope. So maybe one older project. Preemptive Media and myself, we did a couple of projects all addressing data surveillance. Maybe I do the other one real quick. The first one was called Swipe. And what we were interested in here is essentially tracing the data that's stored on American driver's licenses, seeing what's being done with that data, and how that data is used and can serve to create a more complete data profile. So most of you know that if you look on your license, you look on the back, you either have a magnetic stripe or a 2D barcode, and what's on that barcode or on that stripe differs by state in the country. So in some states, it's just what's the same information that's in front of your license. In some states, it's more. In some states, it's less. But essentially, the anecdote behind this project was Brooke Singer, who was still all in Pittsburgh at the time, was going to buy beer, or I can't remember, some kind of liquor. And for the first time, the age wasn't verified just by looking at the license, but by swiping the license. So that started sort of the story behind, that's what started us being interested in tracing the use and purpose of that data. So what you find out very quickly, and that is a few years ago now, I think it's actually much more public knowledge at this point. But it's obviously used for marketing, direct marketing purposes. But it's also used and sold for many other purposes. One of the most prominent one being is like, starting to ramble. So our idea was, first, most people don't know that this is happening. At the time, most people didn't know that this was happening, that their data was used, it was being resold, it was in some cases being misused. And you can kind of think of it as your credit report on steroids. It's like you have data warehouses in the background that have a little bit of data about you, and they get a little bit of more data maybe from your card at Walmart or your how do you call them? No, not the credit cards, but the cards you get at every grocery store to get the cheaper prices. Yeah, your member cards, yeah. So from your member cards, from your magazine subscription, from your voter registration, from your census data, from your university affiliation, from the yellow pages, any type of data about you that's available in a database that's not protected under special measurements can easily be combined and then sold as a much more complete record by an industry company called data warehouses. So there are numbers and numbers around the country. It's really not, it's their business. Their business is collecting and selling the data. So we wanted to create a situation where people would experience that particular type of data collection in a situation where this might actually occur, which is obviously when you buy liquor or cigarettes. So situations of age verification. So what we did is we designed built what we call the swipe bar. So swipe was literally a bar. So we built this beautiful bar. And we were serving as bartenders. We learned how to make martinis. And everybody was carded at our bar. So it wasn't 27 or younger. It was like 120 or younger. You had to show your ID. And with your ID, we would swipe your ID, and while we're preparing the drink for you, we would assemble the most complete data profile we could find. So some of that data was downloaded before, and some of them we collected on the spot online. And with your drink, you would get the receipt with all the data. So you would kind of see the price that you really paid for by giving over your ID. And since we were serving up the bartenders, any type of questions that came up could sort of address and step away from mixing drinks and talk to people. That was a performance actually down in Irvine doing a DJ Spooky performance. So that was really great because we never announced the Swipe Bar as this art project that's coming. We really tried to integrate it at public gathering where liquor is being served. So DJ Spooky obviously gave us a very different demographic and age group than you would get at, let's say, an art opening. So it was really that target group who was being carded, so that was quite interesting. Yeah, I had some other. We often have a web component, so this one was really a more conceptual one. We were encouraging people to buy that data back. So if data warehouses make so and so much of your address and so and so much of your real estate information, so and so much about your motor vehicle registration, you could just calculate it. It's a little Flash program right back. And we also had on the website a little Java program you can download. If you had a 2D barcode, if you're living in a state that has a 2D barcode, you could scan in a high-resolution image and just decode your barcode at home, because obviously not everybody could come to our bar. We're given instructions on how to request your data from these data warehouses, one of the major ones being ChoicePoint, Axiom, Lookout, Plus, and Experian. And it's, again, it's like trying to get your credit report or correct your credit report times 100. It's a lot of data, much harder to track. And the data warehouses don't assume a responsibility for the accuracy of your data, which was one. In a lot of surveillance projects, often what you still get is the big brother metaphor, and it's really not the big brother who's operating here. It's sort of, it's a collaboration between big brother and the industry that makes this type of practice possible. Obviously, the government actually can do more after the Patriot Act, but there's still certain limitations. And without the involvement of the industry, at least at the time, a lot of these things would not have been possible because there is some regulation on the government, but none on the industry in terms of data privacy. One of the most prominent examples on that one was actually in the 2000 Florida election, because I'm sure most of you remember how close it was. And it was 8,000 felons, so presumed felons, were prevented from voting at the time. But it turned out there were actually not 8,000 convicted felons, there were 8,000 people at convicted misdemeanors. So according to Florida law, they had all the voting rights in the world. So I'm not saying the president would have been another one, but there's a possibility of 8,000 people could have voted. And that database mistake came from ChoicePoint, one of the major data warehouses, and the FBI got that data from ChoicePoint to private industry. So it's just, it's one example of that. Okay, and I will end with Zapped, which was another surveillance program. And rather than talking about it, I'm just going to show you the video, which explains it pretty well.
RFID stands for Radio Frequency Identification, a technology that allows for the discrete wireless detection of products, objects, animals, and humans. RFID systems consist of three major components: the readers, the tags, and a database. RFID tags carry a small chip. The chip is powered by radio waves that are generated by the RFID reader and picked up by a tag's antenna. The RFID tag can store data ranging in quantity from 64 bits to thousands of bytes. The RFID reader detects any tag within its range and can read and write to the chip's memory. This interaction is conveniently uploaded into the RFID database. An RFID tag is like a little electronic notepad attached to an object, which nearby readers can read and write to. The first cited use of RFID technology was by the British Royal Air Force for identification of friendly planes during World War II. Bulky radio tags were implemented in the 1960s to trace wildlife for research purposes. In the last 2 decades, however, electronic miniaturization has made passive RFID technology possible and increasingly inexpensive. Passive RFID tags require no battery and can now be produced in massive quantities for 30 cents or less per tag. Although wildlife was the initial target, tracking has progressed to include livestock, pets, cars and trains, prisoners, packaged products, school children, and Mexican government officials. In October 2004, the FDA approved implantable RFID tags for injection into humans within the United States. In July 2005, Tommy Thompson, a former U.S. government official, now board member of a leading RFID company, announced his intentions to be tagged. In January 2005, the United States Department of Defense and Walmart, 2 of the largest organizations in the world, adopted a common RFID standard, providing the imperative to create large-scale infrastructures for RFID tracking and surveillance. Since January 2005, many businesses and organizations have joined Walmart and the Department of Defense in embracing RFID technology. The commercial sector is attracted to this technology for several reasons. RFID increases efficiency and speeds up the supply chain. RFID increases product visibility, so no parts go missing and shelves don't sit empty. RFID enables authentication, letting consumers know that they're getting what they paid for. And RFID promises safety and security. In other words, RFID allows for fewer employees, lower prices, and higher profits. Preemptive Media thinks there is more to the RFID story. RFID eliminates anonymity. Tags and identification cards, such as passports or student IDs, carry sensitive personal information. They can be read at a distance to reveal a person's nationality, the medications they take, or the literature they read. RFID increases data collection. Businesses and government already collect a lot of personal information, and RFID technology makes data collection even easier, faster, and more pervasive. In 2004, Walmart disclosed that it owns 460 terabytes of consumer data, more than 2 times as much data as the entire Internet. RFID institutionalizes surveillance. RFIDs generate a large amount of data that can be used to track people's movements and behaviors without their knowledge or consent. Indiscriminate use of RFID encourages data surveillance, making this the norm rather than the exception. In the United States, where there are currently no data privacy laws, the mass deployment of RFID encourages free and unrestricted data exchange. Here are two true stories about how personal information can be accessed and shared through a series of unlikely exchanges. Farrell's Ice Cream Parlor starts a birthday club and gives free ice cream to kids on their birthdays. Unbeknownst to these kids, Farrell's sells the birthday club data to a list broker. The list broker sells the names of all birthday club boys to the U.S. Selective Service. The U.S. Selective Service then sends the boys a friendly letter on their 18th birthdays, reminding them to register for the draft. Not as much fun as eating free ice cream. A man moves from upstate New York to New York City for a summer job. After arriving, the man buys an electronic toll tag for his new commute. The company sells the man's travel information to his car insurance company. The man's car insurance quadruples as a result. Preemptive Media has developed a useful kit that helps people assess their own RFID situation. The kit includes a Zapped workbook. Brush up on how RFID works and where it is being used. Zapped RFID Scout buttons. Let your friends know you are a person to ask about RFID. A Zapped keychain. This device has been altered in such a way that it rings in the presence of an RFID reader. A carrier can know if he or she is currently at risk of being zapped. Carrying this with you is currently the only method of self-defense against this hidden surveillance system. RFID zone warning stickers. Sticker the area with warning labels when your keychain rings. Zapped maps. Keep track of where RFID readers are and when they proliferate. RFID tags. Customize RFID tags in order to insert your personal message into an RFID database. Use this form of resistance whenever and wherever you think RFID creep has gone too far. For those hard-to-reach places, Preemptive Media has designed zapped roaches, also known as the Madagascan jam and hissing roaches. These friendly creatures carry a reprogrammed RFID tag on their back, which has been carefully attached in order to allow for free movement and animal-friendly treatment. Sleeping during the day and hunting at night, the Madagascan jam and hissing roach makes an ideal partner for human-induced RFID jamming. Reprogramming a zapped roach tag with a new product code could confuse the database into thinking that baby socks are on the loose late at night. After putting on appropriate roach release attire, place your roach into the lunchbox. Other objects, such as coffee cups, may also be used as animal-friendly camouflage delivery devices. Enter your chosen destination and head towards the offensive reading zone. Set down your delivery container and discreetly open it.
this project, we had one additional person, another artist working named Heidi Kumau, who's now based in Michigan and who worked a lot on the animation side. Okay, well, I think I will end here. Well, thanks for your patience.
We're going to pass, because we're streaming this live, we're going to pass around the mic so that when you have questions, you'll speak into the mic and then it'll stream. You'll stream. Questions, anybody?
I have a question about the RFID project. The hardware is standardized, but what's the format of information that's stored on these things? I mean, is it the proposal is great, but is it realistic that you could actually sort of jam the system, or you know, is the data unformatted? Is it like XML? Is it?
It's like, it comes in many different formats actually, so there is not one RFID standard. There are different protocols for the actual communication, different frequencies. So you have the type, you have the 915 megahertz, I believe, which actually sort of sends information up to 20 feet in terms of distance between reader and tag. You have other ones that are basically touching. So it's like you have different communication protocols and you have different storage protocols. The simplest ones are essentially it's just a number. I mean, that's all that's on there. So it's very close to being a barcode to ones who have entire chips that can get more and more data. But I don't think your question of, can you jam the system? Is it possible in terms of storage format? That's really not the issue, because anything that allows you to read that information also allows you to write it. So it's really not hard to get those devices. So we really did reprogram and those tags. The issue is more of like the database at the other end will allow you to have that product code in there. I mean, I'm sure there are protections, right? So it's like, I don't know if we put anything into Walmart's database. I'm not going to make that claim, right? But it's like, technically it's possible.
I wonder, not coming from a science or engineering background, when you make things, when you build objects, do you try and manage the aesthetics, or is it sort of what's available out there to get it done? How do you approach that?
The actual devices? Yeah, we do what can we afford and what's possible. That's really it. I mean, in terms of the design for the Air project, yes, we were thinking about the outer casing, and we worked with people at iBeam, actually, a designer there to get it done. A lot of the graphics, we care about that. I mean, 2 of us 3 are trained as artists, and the other one has been working with artists for so long that he's caring too at this point. But in terms of the actual electronics, I don't care. I care that it works. So,
It's always important for students to have a sense of the process, and I think specifically for this kind of work, it's clear it's ongoing. There's projects that go on for 2-3 years and that continue living on even after you're done. Can you talk a little bit about that process? Because it's not usually what is being taught.
yeah. So, I mean, it really depends in this case. It's case by case, but none of the projects, unfortunately, at this point in my life are done in less than a year, which as an artist, as you know, is not very practical because there's always the demand for the new. It's like, even I tell you myself, I was self-conscious coming to UCLA. I was like, man, I was just here a year ago. What else, what new do I have to say? And I'm like, they're going to be different people. It's going to be okay. But it's, so there is a rather long turnaround time. And on top of it, if you do more site-specific, and by site, I don't mean necessarily location, physical site, right? But topic aside, it's like the RFID research we did, and especially in the SWIPE research we did, that worked really well in the US. well, we had a lot of invitations in Europe, and suddenly you have to decline invitations based on just that. So I'm not recommending it for those who are up for the big, quick, and fast career, because it takes a long time, and it doesn't always travel well. But the way I work and we work, and I think it was similar with the work I did with Critical Art Ensemble, you sort of do a project, you maybe show it to it for a year, maximum 2, and then all of us get bored and retire it and do the next version. So, yeah, in some cases what happens in exhibitions is that we actually show documentation, so you get a lot of curators mad at you. In many cases for good reasons, because it's just not as great to show documentation about the project than the actual project, but the moment you do performative work or work that includes any type of live component, often that's the only choice you have, because as much as you want to do it everywhere, sometimes it's not technically possible. Sometimes, actually far too many times, you get reminded that you actually have a job, and there is only so many trips in a quarter you can do, because you guys are waiting there. So it's like, there is a lot of those practical logistics that, frankly, there are many times where you burn out, but you do that in any type of profession where you're passionate about. Yeah. So it's sort of, yeah. Okay, well, thanks. Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for your patience. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank